Today is March the 7th, and in 2 days' time I will not be on a plane for exactly 1 year, which over the past 40 years is a record. But I thought I'd start my garden blog again. And what you're looking at here are Iris reticulata. What I do with tubs like this in the winter is I layer them. So you'll see just on the right-hand side there, you'll see a small pansy. They've been flowering all winter, and they die back a bit, and now the iris have come up. I think these little irises are much better than crocuses because they have an intensity and a colour which is so beautiful early in spring, and also they last longer because birds don't interfere with them. Now underneath, given the layering here, the third layer, in this context, are tulips. And you can just see the leaves coming up through the ground. So in about a month or so, I will have tulips here instead of the irises and the pansies. We're now at the front of the house, and here is another pot with layering. You can see the pansies more clearly this time, but there's also irises in here, and these very small daffodils I buy every year. And if you look closely, you can just see some tulip leaves. So here are pansies on top, then the irises, then the daffodils, and finally the tulips. Sadly though, things die in the garden. And here's one of my two Lavaterias, and the other one looks the same, which I think got caught by the recent frosts we had, and is probably dead. I'll cut it right back and see what happens. But I'm prepared to put up with this because they're not fully hardy, but they do produce such beautiful pink and cerise flowers all summer long. And they grow quite tall, as you can see here. Of course, changes have to be made, as they do every year. You may remember these. These are my weeping roses that I bought 20 years ago from David Austin. Now, normally at this time of year, the furthermost branches would be about 3 feet off the ground. But because the posts had rotted over the years, the roses themselves were leaning over at alarming angles. And so in order to put new posts in, we've had to cut them back, really quite extremely, as you can see, and put in new posts. Hopefully they will grow. But I think in the end, this was the only solution we had, because if they'd continued to lean over, then they would have reached the ground and actually been quite unsightly. Now, this is what I do every year. We're in my main white greenhouse, and you can see here many plants which I purchased about a week ago from Aylitz Nursery near St Albans. And I go there because they're a genuine nursery and they always produce reliable plants. Immediately in front of you, you see plug plants which I've potted on. And if I move over to this side, you can see a very large number of plants where I've also potted them on with their labels. And these will grow over the next few months. There remain, of course, very significant levels of potting on to be done, because down here are the plug plants themselves. And as you can see, there are many of them, maybe a bit blurry here. Some indeed look as if they may come into flower fairly soon. There is about 350 plug plants in here, and this is one of the pleasures of my year, in that I will pot on every one of them. I'll probably lose maybe 10, and I'm not going to tell you how much all of this cost, because Jane insists every year I buy fewer and fewer plants, and somehow that doesn't seem to work. I seem to find that I acquire a lot more, although one of our friends, Sue, wants some of my plants for her garden, so perhaps I'll get away with it this year. And finally, looking over here, these are my dahlias. I lift most of my dahlias in November, before the frosts really start, and I put them into fresh compost, and I store them in a relatively warm place like this greenhouse. And soon I'll start to gently water them, not too much because otherwise the tubers would rot. And then hopefully they'll be ready for planting out in late May, early June. However, I always lose some, and Jane has become a very strong proponent of dahlias, and I know she's bought some more tubers, so goodness knows where we're going to put them, but I guess we'll have as many this year as we had last year. So that's it for now. It's the beginning of spring. It's really exciting. The birds, the squirrels are out in force. We seem to have more pigeons than ever.